What's up, nerds? Today will be a short one. I wanted to review this Docker CLI wrapper that I've created and kind of demo what I've done so that you can incorporate it yourself, maybe use it, maybe create your own. But essentially, I use Docker a lot. I have a web series about building web apps, and I use Docker to develop locally. And I find myself using the Docker CLI a lot. So CLI, the command line interface, you run Docker PS, which shows you all the running processes. So this is a Docker thing, and then it shows you all the containers. Now the thing with CLIs, they're immensely useful, but there's a ton of different commands that do a lot of different things. They're arguments and options and all sorts of different things that are used in different ways. And you either have to memorize all this and kind of remember what you use, and maybe that's muscle memory. So, you have Docker stop, and then that has a help, and you can kind of help guide yourself and figure things out. So you can memorize all this stuff. So one of the issues is you have to memorize it, and then the other issue is that it takes a number of keystrokes to do something. So if you want to stop a container, you would do Docker stop, but you need to provide the container ID. So if you do Docker PS first, and it's like, okay, this is the container, and then you're copying it, and then you do Docker stop. That is a number of keystrokes. And if you're doing this a lot, it just wears down your productivity. I only have so much time in the day to work on stuff, and I don't want to spend a lot of my keystrokes doing CLI stuff. So one of the techniques that I found helpful is to create wrappers around the CLI, and it's helpful for a number of reasons. So we have a number of different scripts: Docker cleanup, Docker login, Docker logs, Docker return running container ID, and Docker stop. So if you look at these, I've done what I normally do. So you have, the first one is Docker cleanup. So this comes with a help command, -h. And what I've done is I've told my future self, this leverages the Docker prune to clean up the local environment. So what is the Docker prune? Well, I left myself to the actual docs, and I can go here and I can look through, okay, this is what the different commands are. I can read about everything that they have: prune containers, prune volumes. So the script itself actually shows me where things are, as I often have to clean up my local. And then as you can see, I have basically shortcutted the prune containers command, the prune images, the prune network, the prune system, which is everything, and prune volumes. And when you look at the code, all I've done is just create shortcuts for what I would have to run through the CLI. And again, two problems. I would have to memorize this to know what I need to do in my head. And if I don't memorize it, I got to Google for it. And if I do have it memorized, I have to type all this stuff. And that can be a lot. So I create a script that helps kind of deal with this for me. And it makes both ramping back up, if I haven't touched this for a while, a lot faster. And it just helps with overall productivity. So the next one we have is Docker login. So what does that do? Docker login. There's also going to be a help. So this logs into a running Docker container. It's used for debugging and exploratory purposes. Comes with some extra options, but once again, some of the stuff I've used, I've created docs for. So I use the Docker exec, that's what this is, and I use the Docker PS, which is that running processes. So I can say Docker, and then it says, I can either give it the running image container ID, which I tell myself you can get this running Docker PS. So I'll run Docker PS and take a container ID, and then I can do ID, and it logs in. So that's pretty cool. What else can I do with a shortcut? Let's go back to the help. It says I can use T. So use the image name, can be a partial or complete match, to try and log in. So it can be found running Docker PS. So I know there's one with a Docker with a DB. So you have Docker PS, and here's some names. Postgres has a DB in it, Angular, Spring. So I can actually run tdb, and it will find, using the name, it matches this, automatically pulls the container ID and logs me in. Awesome. What about if I put in Angular? same deal. It found it. So this is a way to, I always have to log in. I'm always looking at stuff, and I don't want to have to remember the command, which at times can be pretty long. This particular one, docker exec it, and then the running image container ID, and then I run just sh and then a command you can pass in. But one of the things that I do is, like, if you have that T, so you'll check for a running Docker service that match or partially match what you put in, and it runs another script that I have, which is getting the running image container from a name. Immensely useful. So this is the Docker login. Sometimes I run Docker images in the background. So in addition to login, we have Docker logs. It's just to grab the logs for a running container. Logs has its own documents. And so I'm just linking to things, and this is stuff that you can use. These are completely generic. You can copy and paste them. You can steal them. And it all runs off the same core code. So you can give it the Docker image container ID from running Docker PS, or you can just type the name. So if you want to see the logs for the DB, then you can do this, and here they are. You're printing out the logs for the DB. Pretty cool. So we have the Docker return running container ID. This is a script that works on its own. So if you do Docker return running container ID, look at the help. This prints out the container ID given a partial or complete string, and it leverages that Docker PS. So you'll give it an image name like we did, Spring this time, and it just echoes the hash value that corresponds to Spring, D309, D309, and then it just echoes that. So as a bash, it can be plugged into a variable, and then we use that variable to inject it where we need it later. So all these scripts are both standalone and compound, and they work with each other. And then, of course, if you need to stop things, which I often do, this one's a little bit simple, but it's basically I provide a full stop. So it'll just stop everything. So you have Docker PS, Docker stop. Doesn't do anything because I didn't provide it, but it says leverage Docker stop to stop running processes. Note that there is no default set. This means no options provided, nothing will happen. So if you do Docker F, it just stops everything, and we're done. So yeah, that's an overview of these wrapper scripts, huge productivity gains, why I use them, why you should use them, and just check the description. All the code's public and it's generic, so you can just copy them and put them into your Docker project. Hope that was helpful.